Welcome to Dialogues for Change. Life is not a void to be filled. It is a plenitude to be discovered. Today, I would like to share with you some inspirations on yoga, taken from this very nice introduction to yoga by Georg Feuerstein, The Yoga Tradition. And one of the reasons I would like to share some thoughts with you from this book is because there has been such a big trend nowadays surrounding yoga, which has really become like one health and fitness practice which you find in many different forms everywhere, that I think it's good to sometimes remind that yoga is a much richer tradition. It's a spiritual path. It's touching on many aspects of the human being, and does not only consist of some physical exercise. At the same time, it is also related to a specific place, India. And so I would like to share some thoughts with you on, let's say, some context of yoga. It is important to remember that India's spiritual technology is also based on models of reality only. The ultimate realization, known as enlightenment or God realization, is in the last analysis ineffable. It transcends thought and speech. Hence the moment the God or self-realized adept opens his or her mouth to speak about the nature of that realization, he or she must resort to metaphors, images, and models. And models are intrinsically limited in their capacity to communicate that indivisible condition. In some respects, the models proposed in the consciousness disciplines of the East have greater fidelity to reality. The reason for this is that the yogic models have been forged by a more comprehensive sensitivity. The yogis use means of cognition whose existence is barely acknowledged by Western scientists, such as clairvoyance and higher states of identification with the objects of contemplation, which are called samadhi. In other words, yoga operates with a more sophisticated theory of knowledge, epistemology, and theory of being, ontology, recognizing levels or dimensions of existence that most scientists do not even suspect exist. At the same time, however, those traditional spiritual models are not as rigorously formulated as their modern Western counterparts. They are more intuitive, hortatory than analytical, descriptive. Manifestly, each approach has its distinct field of application and usefulness, and both can learn from each other. The reigning paradigm of Western science is Newtonian materialistic dualism, which affirms that there are real subjects, observers, confronting real objects out there. This view has of late been challenged by quantum physics, which suggests that there is no reality that is entirely divorced from the observer. India's psycho-spiritual technology has likewise been subject to a ruling paradigm, which can be described as verticalism. Reality is thought to be realizable by inverting attention and then manipulating the inwardly focused consciousness to ascend into ever higher states in the inner hierarchy of experience until everything is transcended. Thus, the motto of typical Indian yoga is in, up, and out. This vertical model of spirituality is founded in archaic mythical imagery, which pictures reality in polar opposition to conditioned existence. Heaven above, earth below. As the contemporary adept Dafri John Adida has shown, this model is a conceptual representation of the human nervous system. As he put it succinctly, the key to mystical language and religious metaphor is not theology or cosmology, but anatomy. All the religious and cosmological language of mysticism is metaphorical, and the metaphors are symbols for anatomical features of the higher functional structures of the human individual. Those who enter deeply into the mystical dimension of experience soon discover that the cosmic design they expected to find in the inward path of ascent to God is in fact simply the design of their own anatomical or psychophysical structures. Indeed, this is the secret divulged to initiates of mystical schools. Joe Negro Sansonese explored the somatic origins of myth in his important but not widely enough known work, The Body of Myth. He defined myths succinctly as culture-laden descriptions of samadhi. As he explained, each meditation takes the yogi or yogini deep into the body, putting him or her in touch with this or that organ. The somatic journey is then externalized in mythic utterances. There is much truth to Sansoni's statement, but it is not the entire truth. Some states of consciousness go beyond proprioception, beyond the body, and it is precisely these states that the yoga adepts seek to cultivate. Enlightenment or liberation itself is definitely a body-transcending condition. Here the entire universe becomes a body for the liberated being. Also, not all myth-making derives from ecstatic experiences. The most severe limitations of the verticalist paradigm is that it involves an understanding of spiritual life as a progressive, inward journey from unenlightenment to enlightenment. This gives rise to the misconception that reality is to be found within, away from the world, and that consequently, to renounce the world means to abandon it. It is to the credit of India's adepts that this paradigm did not remain unchallenged. For instance, in Tantra, which straddles both Hinduism and Buddhism, a different understanding of spirituality is present. As will be elaborated in chapter 17, Tantra is founded in the radical assumption that if reality is anywhere, it must be everywhere, and not merely inside the human psyche. The great dictum of Tantrism is that the transcendental reality and the conditional world are co-essential. Nirvana equals samsara. In other words, transcendental ecstasy and sensory pleasure are not finally incompatible. Upon enlightenment, pleasure reveals itself to be ecstasy. In the unenlightened state, pleasure is simply a substitute for the ecstasy that is its abiding ground. This insight has led to a philosophy of integration between spiritual concerns and material existence, which is particularly relevant today. Yoga in the modern West. In our struggle for self-understanding and psycho-spiritual growth, we can benefit immensely from a liberal exposure to India's spiritual legacy. We need not, of course, become converts to any path or accept yogic ideas and practices without questioning. C.G. Jung's warning that we should not attempt to transplant Eastern teachings into the West rings true at a certain level. Mere imitation definitely does more harm than good. The reason is that if we do adopt ideas and lifestyles without truly assimilating them emotionally and intellectually, we run the risk of living inauthentic lives. In other words, our role-playing gets the better of us. Yet Jung was overly pessimistic about people's ability to sift the wheat from the chaff, or to learn and grow whole even from the negative experiences. Moreover, his insistence that Westerners differ radically in their psychic constitutions from Easterners is plainly incorrect. There are indeed psychological differences between the Eastern and the Western branches of the human family, differences that are readily apparent to seasoned travelers and those who cross the cultural divide between East and West, North and South. These differences are admittedly even considerable when we compare ancient Easterners and contemporary Westerners, but they are not radical or unbridgeable. Here we must remember that with the possible exception of a few isolated tribal peoples, humanity has shared the same structures of consciousness ever since what the German philosopher-psychiatrist Karl Jaspers has called the actual age. The great transformative period around the middle of the first millennium before Christ, during the actual age, the world of antiquity went beyond the mythopoetic form of thought characteristic of earlier ages. Pioneering spirits like Socrates, Gautama the Buddha, Mahavira, Lao Tzu, and Confucius embodied a new cognitive style, showing a clear preference for thinking in more strictly rational terms, rather than in predominantly mythological metaphors. Hence we can resonate with the ancient teachings of yoga, even though they are a product of a personality type and culture that did not yet suffer from the excessive growth of left-brain thought or abstract intellection, which is the hallmark of our own epoch. The dialogue between East and West is one of the most significant events of our century. If, as Jung confidently asserted, the West should create its own yoga in the centuries to come, it will not be on the foundations of Christianity alone, which was his contention, but rather on the new global foundations laid as a result of the dialogue between the two halves of planetary humankind. At any rate, it is important to understand that this dialogue is necessarily a personal matter, which occurs on the stage of each individual's heart and mind. That means we, you and I, must initiate and nurture it. This undertaking is an enormous challenge and obligation, but also an unparalleled opportunity for assisting the Atman project as it moves us towards our own awakening in the larger reality. I find these thoughts very inspiring. On the one hand, because I hope that for those of you who may not be aware of it, yoga is really much wider than just some good workout. And also to, on the one hand, make you understand the need. If you want to understand any path, you have to know its context, you have to know its culture, you have to know where it's located. Otherwise you may miss out very important things. And on the other hand, if you really explore a different path, then also comes the question of how to dialogue between those different paths. And I like the end of this little passage, where Georg Feuerstein invites us to intercultural dialogue, but which starts with the intracultural dialogue, because it's within you that you will have to experience these different forms. There are different expressions of these things that are beyond saying, but which have their beauty in being said. So I hope that these thoughts inspired you on this Sunday, 30th of March, 2014. Thank you.